All right, so Joe Manchin has been working overtime for corporate America to sabotage all of the most popular parts of Joe Biden's agenda to basically solely serve the interest of a lot of the same corporations and wealthy individuals in the United States who happen to funnel money into his campaign. And so I got an article here for you guys about a Republican Trump-supporting billionaire who is now going to be doing fundraisers for Joe Manchin in the wake of him, again, basically getting every single thing that he wanted out of Joe Biden's agenda, all of the parts that were the main portions that were supposed to be dedicated towards materially helping the working class here in the United States have been completely gutted from the bill. Meanwhile, all of the handouts to the fossil fuel industry and the handouts to the rest of corporate America remain intact, and he is now being rewarded for this behavior. So GOP billionaire Ken Langone says that he will hold a fundraiser for Democrat Joe Manchin, who has worked to shrink Biden's agenda. So if you needed any other indication that Joe Manchin is in fact a Republican in every sense of the word, here it is. He is taking money from Republicans, he is acting like a Republican, and he is sabotaging the Democratic agenda, and still Democrats feel like they have to go soft on Joe Manchin, and the media is still somehow calling him a moderate, even though, again, everything that he got stripped out from the Build Back Better plan, which is not even guaranteed at all to pass as of right now, but everything that he got stripped out from both of these bills were the most popular parts of the bill, even in a conservative state like West Virginia. So he was not acting on behalf of even his conservative constituents. He was purely acting on behalf of GOP billionaires like this motherfucker. So let's go ahead and read some of the details here. So Republican billionaire Ken Langone says he plans to host a fundraiser for Senator Joe Manchin after the conservative West Virginia Democrat blocked key elements of President Joe Biden's agenda. And listen, this is the first time I've seen on this channel, it seems like, the media actually called Joe Manchin a conservative instead of calling him a moderate or a centrist, which he just absolutely is not relative to the American people. But they continue here saying that the comments came as Democrats in Congress continue to hash out major parts of Biden's economic agenda, namely social safety spending, net spending, and plans to battle climate change. And Langone, in an interview Wednesday on CNBC's Squawk Box, praised Manchin for his guts and courage and explained that he was set to raise money for him, and Manchin is not up for re-election until 2024, so unfortunately won't get a chance to primary him for a while. But he says, "I don't see any leadership in place in this country. Thank God for Joe Manchin," as if Joe Manchin is a leader for anyone other than corporate America. But he says, I'm going to have one of the biggest fundraisers I've ever had for him. He's special, he's precious, he's a great American, he added. And Langone has never contributed to one of Manchin's campaigns, according to the nonpartisan Center for Responsive Politics. But Manchin's office did not return a request for comment on Langone's statement. After a publication of this story, Manchin tweeted out a statement, of course, pushing his typical bullshit propaganda about inflation. And this is really cynical to a different level, okay? And let me explain why. So basically, Joe Manchin tweets this out right after he gutted most of the most popular portions of the social spending plan that Biden had put together that would have helped average Americans and working class Americans across the country. And this is what he says. He says, "By all accounts, the threat posed by record inflation to the American people is not transitory," meaning it is not going to cycle out, and is instead getting worse. And from the grocery store to the gas pump, Americans know the inflation tax is real, and DC can no longer ignore the economic pain Americans feel every day. So basically, what he's trying to do here is weaponizing real inflation that is happening within the economy. But what he doesn't say here, and what he hasn't said every time that he brings up inflation, is that the cause of inflation right now, whether it's in gas or whether it's down the supply chain with other products, etc., the main issue that is causing inflation is the fact that we just went through a massive global pandemic and our supply chains have been completely fucked. Okay, this is why we have, thousands of ships that are sitting off the coast of California that can't get into ports because we don't have enough truck drivers, etc., etc. It goes down the supply chain. But that supply chain issue that is currently causing inflation and rising of prices throughout the American economy is not caused by too much government stimulus to working class Americans. And that's what he wants people to believe. He wants you to believe that inflation is happening because, I don't know, they sent out $1,600 stimulus checks to Americans, or because of the child tax credit, or any number of other things that are specifically geared towards helping working class Americans, when that is not why inflation is happening. So by pushing austerity during a moment of inflation in the economy, he is doubling down how bad it is going to be for average Americans in trying to cope with that inflation or the inflationary pressures that are happening in the economy. He's making it twice as bad, because not only will you be experiencing the consequences of inflation in the economy, but then on the back end of that, you're now not going to be getting a lot of the social spending plans that would have helped you through the moment of inflation. And so it's just completely cynical from top to bottom, this entire line about, worrying about the national debt and deficit or inflation. It's all just being bullshit. It's coming out of a bullshit place from people like Joe Manchin, and they're completely disingenuous when they talk about this. They're just weaponizing it to push austerity while they continue to give handouts to some of the most perverse industries that funnel money into their campaigns. And so it gets even better down here, because again, this guy, as well as another billionaire, which we can talk about right here, billionaire investor, this wasn't the only one, this Langone guy, there was another one recently, billionaire investor Nelson Peltz, says that he talks every week to Senator Joe Manchin, who is pushing to cut the Biden agenda. So this was on October 20th, so just before we had a lot of these major cuts to the Biden agenda. And it's like, he is literally, I mean, we also knew because of the leaked calls with that Exxon lobbyist that Manchin talks every single week to Exxon Mobil, okay, this oil company. But in addition to that, he's talking to billionaire investors, and both of these, this Langone guy and the Peltz guy, both of them supported former President Donald Trump, okay? So it's not surprising that Joe Manchin is acting like a Republican. It's because he is a Republican, and because he takes phone calls with Republican billionaires every single week, and they give him his marching orders, and he goes and he dutifully follows those marching orders without question, because that's exactly who Joe Manchin is. He is an entirely corrupted ghoul who is acting against the interests of average Americans and on behalf of corporate America and even billionaire Trump supporters. So that's where he's at. And again, it's not surprising that he would oppose things like raising the corporate tax rate, which is one of the specific examples they brought up in that other article that I wanted to hammer home on, because I think this is like a perfect example of the ratchet effect, which is this concept we talk about a lot in leftist circles, which is that Republicans, every time they were in office, they crank that dial all the way to the right, and ramp up things like corporate tax rates, etc., cuts for the wealthy, increasing the military budget. And then when Democrats get in power, not only do they not radically change that dynamic or go opposite in the other direction towards the left, but they just block any progress from the left. So we are perpetually moving further and further to the right as Republicans take us down every single rabbit hole, and Democrats fail to bring us back out of them. But this is just one example of that, right? You see here the corporate tax rate in the United States under the Obama administration. You see here from like 2010 all the way through to the Trump tax cuts bill that was passed in 2017. You see here corporate tax rate, and listen, this is not what most corporations, billion-dollar corporations, pay in taxes. It's not 35%. Their actual effective tax rate is significantly lower than that because of all the loopholes that also need to be closed. But even just looking at this for perspective, so under the Obama administration, the corporate tax rate was 35% consistently. Then Trump's tax cuts are put in place in 2017, and they lower that from 35% down to 21%. And now Joe Manchin won't let Democrats go any higher, and Kirsten Sinema as well, won't let Democrats go any higher than 25%. So they're currently negotiating bringing the corporate tax rate back up to 25%. So in other words, a different way of framing that is Joe Manchin and the Democratic establishment agree with the vast majority of the Trump tax cuts. And mind you, this is something that they rallied against. This is something that they ran against in previous elections. They ran against these Trump tax cuts that overwhelmingly went to the rich and powerful. And now when they're actually in office, all they're doing is barely raising them, not even halfway back up to where they were under the Obama administration. And Obama himself was a corporate stooge through and through. So it's like the entire Democratic and Republican parties are clearly bought and corrupted by the same financial interests. And that's really the main point that you got to take away from a story like this, is that it's not that Joe Manchin is necessarily just acting like a Republican, which he is in the corrupt ways that he's acting, the industries that he's choosing to participate with. But in a broader level, I mean, this is what the Democratic Party is. This is their entire purpose in how they govern, okay? They govern to lose. They govern as if they are powerless. And then when Republicans take power, suddenly we see this resurgence and they're able to pass through whatever unpopular portions of their agenda that they want to. And then Democrats get in power and they're not able to actually undo any of the things that Republicans have done, let alone take us in the left-wing direction. So their entire strategy is preparing to lose to Republicans, not doing anything that the American people overwhelmingly want them to do, being completely terrified and petrified of corporate America, that they're not willing to challenge them or their lackeys like Joe Manchin who take their marching orders from GOP Republican billionaires. There is no movement, because this is what the Democratic and the Republican parties are. This is what it looks like to live in a corporate duopoly where both parties, without question, represent the same capitalist interests.